It has been claimed that each time tensions ease between North and South Korea, whose British embassy is right here behind me, Washington tells Seoul to pull back. A statement from the capital of North Korea, Pyongyang, announced its willingness to participate in the Winter Olympics in South Korea, a decision that led directly to a historic visit to the South by a high-level North Korean delegation. During that visit, an invitation was extended to the South Korean president for a visit to Pyongyang. Signals are emerging that improving relations, which are a byproduct of the Winter Olympic Games, could finally help to diffuse tensions on the Korean Peninsula, which have reached a tipping point. Faced with speculations that the North may be taking advantage of the opportunity to drive a wedge between close allies Seoul and Washington, Washington has hinted that it might be interested in the idea of holding direct negotiations with Pyongyang. In a politically significant move, North Korean and South Korean athletes walked and sat together during the opening ceremonies at the Winter Olympics in a rare statement of unity. This sparked a wave of speculation about the relationship between the two countries. Pyongyang's delegates, amongst them North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's younger sister, Yo-jong, concluded a 3-day visit to South Korea, a historic development in relations between the North and the South. Why is America so influential in Korean politics? And does President Trump have something to gain from creating instability on the Korean Peninsula? Simple questions with important answers. Let's start with this. North Korea announced its willingness to participate in the Winter Olympics in South Korea, extending an invitation to the South Korean president to visit. Do you see this as a positive beginning to unity on the Korean Peninsula? That's the question we put to the public in South Korea. Here's what they said.
Of course I think so. We won't be unified in one day. But if we take small steps one by one, unification can happen in the next generation, if not in my generation. I think North Korea's participation in the Olympics will be very helpful in achieving unification.
I don't know how much about that, but I don't think there's much of a possibility of unification. Even if President Moon goes to Pyongyang, there will be opponents. I wish there will be no monetary transactions, but dialogue and talks with North Korea for the harmony of the Korean Peninsula.
I don't think it can lead to potential unification, because they've done a lot of shows before. I don't think this is that significant.
I don't think it'll directly lead to the unification, but it can direct us to the right way, step by step.
If President Moon goes to Pyongyang and is able to have dialogue with the high-ranked officials in North Korea and to discuss fundamental measures for unification, these events can be seen as moving towards unification. However, if he simply has lunch with the officials and takes a trip around Pyongyang, then I think it's just for a show.
It's hard to say that it's moving closer towards unification. President Moon seems to be in a complicated situation. If I were him, I wouldn't know how to deal with it, as the world's eyes are on him. But I believe he will handle it well, as he is old enough and has experienced the Korean War.
I think it's a step closer to unification, because it seems like North Korea is trying to look like a modern country to the foreign media. Considering this, although we don't know what North Korea is really thinking, at least now it's putting efforts for a potential unification. To materialize this, they are focusing more on peaceful measures than the aggressive ones.
It's hard to say that these events mean movement closer towards unification. However, as inter-Korea relations have been quite bad for the last decade, North Korea's participation in the Olympics and the invitation of President Moon to Pyongyang are meaningful in the sense that they are alleviating the tensions between the two Koreas and recovering their relationship. In the meanwhile, I think we can go a step further. It can lead up to the potential unification in the future.
Well, this is a good start, also a good sign, given all the crisis moments that we have experienced for the last several months. We would not necessarily say that this will be a faster reunification, which is the end game, end goal, but definitely this will speed up the process of inter-Korean dialogue. And also the South Korean government, hopefully, this inter-Korean dialogue will pave the way for eventual Pyongyang and Washington dialogue to resolve the standoff between Pyongyang and Washington for the nuclear crisis.
South Korea seeks Washington's approval to start talks with North Korea. Why, in the view of the South Korean public, does a country so far away, both culturally and geographically, from Korea, stand between the South and the North?
I don't think so. The US is an ally of South Korea. We can coordinate for sure, as North Korea is the enemy of the United States. While we can communicate what we are doing, we don't need to seek approval from the US. South Korea should be holding sovereign power. Although no approval is needed, South Korea can still update the US about what they are doing with North Korea.
It seems like South Korea and the US are trying to work together, but President Moon is out of it. I don't think this is good. I wish to see the two countries collaborating to solve the problem together.
Not sure about seeking approval, but at least they can ask opinions from South Korea. I think the US should ask, as they have a relationship with South Korea, but approval isn't necessary.
We don't need to seek an approval, but coordination will be great. But approval is not necessary. Two Koreas can just work on their part to make it work.
I don't think so, because South Korea is an independent nation, not a territory of the United States. If North Korea wants to arrange something like a dialogue, they should do it directly with South Korea.
I think South Korea needs to seek cooperation and approval from the US in some way. As the US was involved historically, it's impossible to think about the matter without considering the US. Inter-Korean issues also involve other countries other than the US, and this is not just a matter for two Koreas. So I think the US should be included in this issue.
As a sovereign nation, South Korea does not need to seek approval from the US. However, it's true that the US helped Korea out during the Korean War, and for this reason, as an ally of the US, it's necessary for South Korea to cooperate closely with the US.
South Korea is, as you know, independent country. So South Korea does not need any approval from Washington. But given the partnership alliance with the Washington, it's very important for South Korea to have a robust communication with Washington about what is going on. Washington has a sense that South Korea may be not sharing fully about its communication with Pyongyang. You know, the high-level Pyongyang delegation visited Seoul, and there were some meetings between South Korea and North Korea. It's very important that Seoul shares this kind of information with Washington, so both Seoul and Washington are on the same page. So this kind of robust communication is very important for allies.
What effect does America's influence on Seoul have on the chances of peace on the Korean Peninsula? Here are the views of the public in South Korea.
Mike Pence isn't much of an influential figure, both domestically and internationally. I don't think is that significant, although it was rude for him not to stand up.
I think there's a reason for him to do that, probably to stimulate some action, although this is not ideal. You know, always, emotions come back to the person who shared them. I hope people would always take care of each other.
It may be not politically inappropriate, but as a public figure, he should have kept it neutral. As I am not that positive about the unification, I can understand his position. You know, North Korea has caused a lot of issues like developing nuclear weapons, so obviously he does not have a positive opinion about North Korea.
Personally, I think it was inappropriate behavior. Even if the US and North Korea don't have a good relationship, as this is the Olympics, he shouldn't have shown his personal opinions at the event in that way.
I think it's better for him to be honest. Yeah, I think it's better. As far as I know, the United States was more eager to implement sanctions on North Korea. Thereby, I expect to see stronger measures from the United States in the future.
Personally, it's rude. On the other hand, I can understand his action. Personally, I am scared of the United States and its impending demeanor. As for the Korean War, even if it was a war between South Korea and North Korea, the United States was also in it. Considering history, I have fear of the United States as it's difficult to predict its behavior. I'm quite concerned.
The US is quite anxious in seeing inter-Korea relations improving without US intervention. If the two Koreas interact with each other without input from the US, it can be seen as an isolation on the US part. All the negative behavior displayed by Mike Pence during the Olympics certainly reflects this fear in the US. South Korea and the US will need to work together to prevent this from happening.
Well, there's a lot of controversy about Vice President Pence's behavior during his visit in Seoul. We could understand why he did the way he did. He did not send out any impression that the U.S. is willing to sit down with North Korea when North Korea is not displaying any sign of giving up on nuclear weapons. So any sign of outreach toward North Korea might be misinterpreted by Pyongyang, that Pyongyang is not giving up anything, but U.S. is sending out olive branch. So also U.S. is also believing that now it's a sanctions mode. Now we have to implement the sanctions. The U.S. is also concerned about this kind of inter-Korean détente might undermine the U.S. sanctions drive. So that's why U.S. doesn't want to give a missignal to Pyongyang. But then, having said that, this is International Olympic Games. This is the moment where we put aside politics. So that's why when Mike Pence came to this International Olympic Games as a ceremonial leader, but then does not engage Pyongyang in any way that can promote dialogue with Pyongyang, this is a kind of missed opportunity, because even though Olympics it's about sport, but then Olympics have been always used for political purposes as well. So we have to be very realistic. So it's a very rare opportunity that for Mike Pence, one of the top leaders from Washington, to have a face-to-face meeting with one of the top leaders from Pyongyang. And this kind of opportunity, rare opportunity, should have been utilized. But then he just came here as a ceremonial leader, not engaging in Pyongyang for this rare occasion. So this is also missed opportunity. I think it depends on how you interpret U.S. intentions, but then I think history will be a judge.
North Korea is estimated to have between 10 and 20 nuclear warheads. It also has other nuclear stocks for between 30 to 60 more nuclear weapons. Experts estimate that by 2020, North Korea could have up to 100 nuclear warheads. For comparison, in 2016, America, which is so concerned about North Korea's nuclear stockpile, had over 4,000 active and inactive nuclear weapons, with a further 2,800 awaiting disarmament, a total of over 6,800 nuclear devices.
Trump takes a very hostile and provocative approach in politics, especially over North Korea. Does the public in South Korea think he does this to boost his low presidential approval ratings?
This is what I've just said. We are a small country from the US's perspective, so the US is trying to control our sovereignty and trying to redo FTA and things like that. The US wants to keep its control over South Korea, but unification will move Korea out of its control. The US is pissed off at the fact that South Korea is getting out of its control. If unification takes place, then it won't be able to sell its weapons anymore. It's also afraid of Korea's getting close to Russia and China. It's pretty simple.
I don't think there will be another war on Korean Peninsula. But as President Trump is playing his own politics, and he can say something even more aggressive or provocative to gather his supporters. But personally, I don't pay much attention to his words.
I think it can be about his personality. President Obama was more of a moderate, but it wasn't effective. So I guess now he's trying something different. I guess he's being aggressive because North Korea didn't react well to the US acting moderately before.
The two Koreas are the ones who are directly involved. The US and neighbouring countries don't seem to be that helpful, as seen from the case of unification of Germany. No, I don't think they are contributing to foster the relationship between the two Koreas.
One of the reasons why Donald Trump was elected as a president of the United States was that he boosted the pride of Americans. In this case, he needs a public enemy like the Arab states.
Unlike the previous presidents, Trump comes from a business background. I don't think it's possible to entirely exclude one's personal experience in the presidency. So considering his personal background, for him, aggressive behavior worked well in the business world. So is this right or wrong? Well, we'll have to see.
President Trump represents the Republican Party, which has been backing aggressive policies towards North Korea so far. Considering this, it's obvious that President Trump holds a very hostile attitude against North Korea. Extending this, it's understandable to see the US imposing tighter sanctions and more pressure on North Korea despite the changing inter-Korea relations.
Well, this is a lot of people are talking about this, why Donald Trump behaves the way he does. I think Donald Trump is the first US president who really takes North Korean issue seriously. In the past, even the US media talks about North Korea, but given from the US government perspective, let's say that if there are 7 agendas, foreign policy agendas, actually the North Korea was number 8 agenda. That is, that it's not really that important, even the US media was talking about. But Trump was the first US president who really put North Korea at the top of the real US foreign policy agenda. So this is good. But then the way he deals with North Korea raises a lot of questions, and a lot of his harsh comments of North Korea. Some people see this as a very effective way of dealing with North Korea, given that North Korea is seen as a pariah country by US media. But then it also ended up having this effect of putting United States on the same footing with North Korea. So this is actually undermined US credibility and US reputation. So there's cost and benefits about this. But then hopefully Donald Trump may turn out to be an accidental hero, that he takes North Koreans very seriously, and he might end up solving the North Korean issue, which none other his predecessors was able to pull through. So we'll see what happens. He might be a hero, or he might turn out to be someone who really goes out to get North Korea engaged in some sort of military attack. So the chances half and half. History will see how this crisis will turn out to be.
Washington constantly advises South Korea to pull out of talks with North Korea. Does Korean instability help America, and why? Here's the South Korean public's view.
No, but it can't contain China. China doesn't care. Even with THAAD, it's all about politics and power. Even with nuclear weapons here, China won't be doing anything. They just want to use it politically and economically. It's all meaningless.
Aggression does not work well with people, so it's important to soothe North Korea and to have a conversation, instead of promising economic rewards, which ultimately comes from taxpayers.
Unification wouldn't benefit the US much, although it will initially experience economic hardship because of the economic discrepancy between the Koreans. A unified Korea will have a chance to grow. Because a unified Korea can be a threat to the US. Washington isn't that happy to see the improvement in relations, in my opinion.
I don't think the improved relation between the two Koreas will be beneficial for the US. From its perspective, it wants to escalate the situation, to raise the tension for the war in order to sell weapons. I think Trump is doing that because he wants to worsen the relations between two Koreas.
I think he's doing that because the current administration is bringing many benefits to people. Things will change if unification takes place. Then they will lose their benefits. It seems like they are acting based on their economic interest.
Historically, the US was backing more South Korea than North Korea. Because of that, the US can be wary of North Korea and South Korea getting close to each other. While it can outwardly call out for peaceful unification, I think the US can pursue its own profits in this situation. So the US does not like to see the relations between the two Koreas improving. So I think that's why analysts said that.
Fundamentally, North Korea is an enemy of the US. However, as North Koreans are the same ethnicity as South Koreans, they are in a position to foster a peaceful relationship, which creates the conflict. In this context, analysts explain the improvement of the inter-Korea relations as alienating the US out of the alliance with South Korea. In this way, the US has concerns for North Korea regarding North Korea's attitude and actions as an effort to alienate them. Although personally, I think the improvement of inter-Korean relations and the stabilization of the relations can be beneficial for the US. I believe this can be solved by the Korean government and citizens explaining this to the US and persuading them to join the effort.
Well, I don't think Washington necessarily has a negative view per se about the inter-Korean threat. It's just that Washington has been dealing with North Korea for the last 25 years. None of them worked. So for the first time, Washington now engaged in these sanctions, very robust sanctions. Even China is cooperating and adding pressure to North Korea. And for the first time, we analysts think that sanctions on North Korea is working. So how we need to implement these sanctions in the coming month so that North Korea is pressured enough to change its mind and come out to the dialogue table. And suddenly there is inter-Korean thaw that was none of us was able to expect, but then it happened. So Washington is concerned that this kind of inter-Korean thaw and dialogue might undermine the ongoing sanctions against North Korea when North Korea is not showing any signs of willingness to give up on nuclear weapons. So these are where Washington's concerns lies in. Having said that, I think that's why I keep emphasizing that it's very important for Seoul to have a robust communication with Washington about this inter-Korean dialogue and share the information so that both Washington and Seoul are on the same page, because their goal is the same, denuclearization of North Korea. Both Washington and Seoul have the same goal, but they are different in terms of the means to use it. Washington wants to pressure North Korea to realize their goal, while Seoul is a little bit more mixed, sanctions and also dialogue. Now Seoul is also using this dialogue with inter-Korean dialogue with North Korea. So Washington is a little bit concerned that maybe we are out of step between Washington and Seoul. So it's understandable why Washington is concerned about it. So that's why I think it's important for both allies to have a robust dialogue so that they remain on the same page.
American Vice President Mike Pence has told reporters that the United States and South Korea are united in their approach towards North Korea's nuclear program. This followed the Olympic opening ceremonies in Pyongyang, featuring a joint appearance between the athletes from North Korea and South Korea.
In the past, America has refused to talk to North Korea except about nuclear disarmament. Now, with North and South Korea showing signs of friendship, it seems that Washington is getting worried. It has caused some to suggest that the Winter Olympics will help the two Korean states go for gold together. Well, the Americans increasingly look like the ones at risk of moral disqualification from these political games for foul play.